the Congress wasn't consulted. President Obama is lacking political cover, not only with the Arab League, which is equivocating, and other members potentially of NATO, of this coalition, for when a handoff will happen and what will be taking place in the coming days and weeks, but with members of Congress in both parties who don't feel that the mission has been clarified, that the goals have been defined, that there's a definition for success. And if it is true that there are discussions underway between Libyan officials close to Qaddafi and members of our government about the possibility of his leaving, that will make this mission look like a success for a few hours. But there is no definition about what we do, even in the best scenario where he leaves, to either support a member of his own government to take over, try to train these rebels, or break up fights between tribes. The president has never told us how long this will be, and he has never told us what it will involve.
Charles.
Well, I can understand the administration saying because of the situation in Benghazi, they had to rush and they couldn't get congressional approval. But what's not explicable is why the president hasn't addressed the nation. When in 1998 there was the attack on our embassies in Uganda and Tanzania, and there was a single act of retaliation by the United States, not a military operation anywhere near the size and scope of what's happening now. The President of the United States, Clinton, he went on television and explained what he was doing. And so far, this president, who doesn't like to use the word war, he won't use the word war on terror, as Steve says, he doesn't want to talk about the war in Afghanistan, has played this as if it were a piece of legislation, which he'll talk about later. The other oddity here, apart from not wanting to talk about war, is wanting to hide and to disguise and then to hand off American leadership in this operation, which is obviously indefensible. First, it's odd because Obama gives the impression that America, because of her past sins, doesn't have the moral standing to lead an operation intervention of this kind, which is an oddity for a president. And second, as we look around in the disarray in NATO, it is clear that without American leadership, it is a very chancy proposition. You've got the French and the Germans walking out of a NATO meeting on Monday. You've got the Italians threatening they're going to close their air bases if there isn't a resolution of this issue. Today, the Germans pulled their ships out of NATO operations in the Med. And the Norwegians have airplanes in Crete but won't let them go into the air until somebody tells them who the hell is going to be in charge of this operation.
On that Air Force One briefing on the way back from this trip, Ben Rhodes also said that seemed to say that there wasn't going to be a presidential address to the nation on this, but the president was going to continue to talk about it in various events over the next few days. That's the message we got. Steve, I want to play one soundbite from Secretary Clinton. This is up on Capitol Hill before all of this started, asked about Libya.
One of our biggest concerns is Libya descending into chaos and becoming a giant Somalia.
Okay, so that was days before the bombing started. One of the biggest concerns, she said. That gets to AB's point about the next step after, even if Qaddafi leaves.
Right. I mean, I think you have to enter this knowing that there is, you can't plan for some of this. You can't say, okay, this is what's going to happen once the no-fly zone is in place. Once Qaddafi goes, we're going to do A, B, and C. I mean, a lot of this is fluid, so I don't necessarily fault them for that. But it seems to me that they haven't asked many of the fundamental questions that would lead one to do some kind of planning, like what is happening in a post-U.S. command situation. Who are we talking to? How are we going to start the transition? What does that look like? It seems to me that they haven't even asked the questions, or if they've asked them, we don't know that they've asked them because they're not communicating on it.
And do we know who these rebels are?
What we know since we've gone in is that the rebels are disorganized, unarmed, lacking in weaponry, lacking in medicine, lacking in fuel, and telling us that they will die without ground support and that air support is not helping them and that the tanks are killing them and that they need people to come in and literally start from the ground up. And if that is something we are not going to do, that needs to be articulated by the president. He said no boots on the ground, but really exactly what is the post-Qaddafi democracy of Libya, and how long can we hang in, and how long can we offer our support, and what will that support entail, especially if our NATO allies or our Arab allies start to pull back, and it's still looking like people are fighting a civil war. It's a lot of
up
in the air.
A lot of questions. Coming up, healthcare. The law is 1 year old. Stay with us.
First, it goes to the appellate court. There's district court, then there are appeal courts, and then it goes to the Supreme Court. But here's the key point, Bill. And I said this in the State of the Union. I don't want to spend the next 2 years refighting the battles of the last 2 years.
For the Obama administration to oppose this expedited review, to me, is unconscionable. It strings this thing out potentially for years of litigation, where we could perhaps, with their agreement, have an expedited review in the Supreme Court.
Well, the health care law was signed into law 1 year ago today. And you look at the latest polls. Here's one from Fox News Opinion Dynamics. And the question, do you believe the health care law will be repealed or not? And there you see no, 56%. It won't be repealed. We're back with the panel. Thoughts on the health care law and what was talked about there, Charles, about the expedited review. It's going to eventually get to the U.S. Supreme Court.
It will, although it'll be a race whether the court will decide it or the people will decide it. The decision on whether it's repealed will be made on Election Day in 2012. If the Republicans win, they will also win the House and the Senate, and it will be repealed. If Obama wins, it becomes the law of the land and unrepealable until the end of time. I'm not sure it'll get to the Supreme Court before that, and I would prefer if it were to be repealed. In a democracy, it's probably its best if it happens by a vote rather than by the fiat of the Supreme Court. But I think that's why it's so important in the presidential election, because it is the central issue highlighting the major issue of the campaign, the major issue between the Republicans and Democrats, the size, the scope, the spending, the debt, the reach of government. That's what the midterm election was about. That will be what the general election is about.
AB?
Well, I think I disagree with Charles. If the president wins if the Supreme Court could act before the summer of 2012, in which case the rejection of the mandate would really cause the whole thing to fall apart. It would really hinder President Obama's reelection campaign. But even if he were reelected and there was a Republican House and Senate, it would lead to the end of the bill, the unraveling of the law itself. If the mandate is supported by the court's ruling, it builds the political support eventually for the law, probably becomes more popular, and it will probably change public opinion somewhat better from today. Today, public opinion stands exactly where it did a year ago. It's mixed in the middle, but slightly more people oppose the law than support it. Mostly, majorities are confused about what's in the law still a year later after the long battle and the administration's, millions of dollars spent and time spent to try to educate the public on its benefits. Some people even believe that it's been repealed. So there's a lot of confusion that they still have to work with. I guess they hope optimistically that means there's room to grow its popularity. But I think if you look at the fact that only 12,000 people have joined the high-risk pools, that's 3% of what the administration expected would be filling these pools. If people aren't taking advantage of that, and you look at the incredible expansion of Medicaid and what is that doing to bankrupt states, I don't know how it becomes more popular over time. If after a year you have 3% people joining this sort of central tenet of lowering costs.
And Steve, it's the Medicaid that's the biggest question for states, for governors when they talk about it, the flexibility that they would like. And two, the question about these waivers, more than 1,000 of them issued to various corporations, unions, and others.
And the fact that there doesn't seem to be any rhyme or reason as to who gets them. I mean, it's so confusing to people the way that it looks. But if you look at where public opinion was a year ago and where it is now, it's actually the case that if you get into the guts of many of these polls, the standing of the law has slipped, of healthcare reform has actually slipped ever so slightly. That is really amazing to me. And not only because you had political promises from leaders, Democratic leaders in Congress saying the more people know once this is implemented, it'll become more popular, but also because The problem with the way that the law is going now is that people still don't get it. They don't know what's in it. And what they do see, the costs going up by $115 billion, according to CBO, doctor shortages that Jim Angle talked about, is problematic.
That is it for the panel, but stay tuned for a lesson in composure. Finally tonight, many reporters have noted that the Japanese people have responded to the earthquake and the tsunami that hit that country, not to mention the nuclear reaction and the problems with the nuclear plants, very calmly, very courageously, and orderly.
Everything that I've seen has been very orderly, even though the lines are long and it's jammed. It's just a matter of time. People aren't panicking. People aren't pushing and shoving and shouting.
One thing we haven't seen much of is violence, chaos, and looting.
Come on, Japan. You've got every excuse to freak out. In America, we know how to do it. And that's just when the Lakers win.
Thanks for inviting us into your home tonight. That's it for this special report. Fair, balanced, and unafraid. The online show starts right now.